Let's not wake her up. Art and literature. The night Frankenstein was born. If you think the drama and anxiety in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is intense, you should get a load of the lives that hovered in and around its creation. What a soap opera. Born in 1797, Mary Wollstonecraft, is that right? Wollstonecraft? Godwin was the only child after intellectuals William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, who died only 11 days after giving birth to her. Although Mary didn't have an extensive formal education, she was tutored by her father and given free rein of his library. Mary and Percy. Percy Bysshe Shelley had been bullied in school and had few friends, so he read a lot. Through his reading, he came up with ideas that society considered heretical and dissident. When Oxford University caught wind of Percy's pamphlet, The Necessity of Atheism, he was expelled, which caused a falling out with his father. Shortly after that, he married a woman named Harriet Westbrook. Percy delved deeper into radical politics, publishing poems about atheism, vegetarianism, and free love. He also gave revolutionary speeches on religion and politics and traveled throughout Europe. When he made his way to the home of William Godwin, one of his intellectual heroes, he found inspiration as well as Godwin's brilliant 16-year-old daughter Mary, against Godwin's wishes. Mary and Percy were both advocates of free love, began a romantic relationship. Mary may have believed in it more as a theory because although Percy encouraged her to take other lovers, she had little interest in pursuing anyone but him. Despite her objections, Percy engaged in amorous relations with women both inside and outside of their social circle. Enter Lord Byron. Lord George Gordon Byron was born with a clubfoot, which was a source of shame his entire life, but that didn't keep him from becoming a well-known poet. Byron famously ripped and roared through life, writing poems, speaking eloquently at the House of Lords, piling up debt, and burning through love affairs with both men and women. In 1816, Byron decided to leave England temporarily until the rumors about his lifestyle died down and some of his debts had been forgotten. But what he expected to be a trip across Europe ended up being a permanent exile from England. Claire Clairmont was the stepsister and very close friend of Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. Despite this, Claire became involved with Percy while Mary was pregnant with his child. At 18, after an on and off affair with Percy, Claire moved on to a powerful crush on Byron. Under the pretense of looking for advice on how to become a poet, Claire wrote him letters daily and eventually became his lover. When Byron left England in 1816, Claire followed, bringing Mary and Percy with her for a visit. Unbeknownst to the rest of the group, Claire was pregnant with Byron's child. To say the least, tensions were brewing. The year without a summer. Meteorological moodiness was on tap for the summer of 1816. The weather was so dark and cool that it was almost as if summer never came at all. Many nights at Byron's Swiss villa on Lake Geneva were spent inside because of the cold and rain. On one particular night, Mary, Percy, Byron, and John Polidori, Byron's physician, were reading ghost stories. Byron challenged the members of the group to each write a spooky tale. Mary delighted in the challenge. Perhaps it was her need to be accepted by the group on her frustration with fitting into a role in which she couldn't express her considerable intelligence. Or maybe she simply wanted to write just as she had desired all her life. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the alleged rampant opium usage among the group on this dark and stormy night. The story that Mary wrote started as a wisp, a few pages, about a doctor who creates a monster by snatching body parts from morgues. It vaguely explained the process in which these parts are fused together and animated. While the initial story was short, there was enough there for Percy to encourage her to develop it. Over the next few days, Mary completed a draft, and she finished writing Frankenstein the following year. On January 1st, 1818, the first edition of Frankenstein was published anonymously with a foreword by Percy. The second edition, which was released in 1823, was credited to Mary Shelley, and in 1831, the first popular edition of the book was published after the text was heavily revised by Mary. The novel became a classic despite the initial criticism it received. To this day, people around the world love to read about the sad monster that may or may not represent the feelings of floating around a lavish Swiss home one stormy night. The finale. The next few years remained drama-filled for the four characters in the soap opera. Claire had a daughter by Byron, a daughter she eventually left for him to raise. He put the child in a convent where she died of typhus at age 5. Mary married Percy after his first wife died. They had 4 children, all but one of whom died in childhood. Percy drowned when his boat capsized during a sudden storm in Italy in 1822, just 6 years after the summer at Byron's villa on Lake Geneva. And just 2 years after that, Byron died of a violent fever in Greece while fighting for Greek independence from the Turks. Overdue. Just how long have you had the library's copy of War and Peace? And when exactly are you planning to pay that hefty fine you've accrued? Read on to see how your library misdeeds stack up. The most overdue library book in U.S. history was never officially checked out, and the man who took it thought it belonged to another library entirely. That's the story that emerged in February 2009 when book collector Mike Dow of Lake Forest, Illinois, showed up at the Washington and Lee University Library with Volume 1 of W.F.P. Napier's History of the War in the Peninsula and in the south of France. According to a handwritten note on one of the pages, the book was taken from the nearby Virginia Military Institute on June 11, 1864 by Union soldier C.S. Gates during a raid on the area. The book passed to Gates's descendants and eventually ended up with Dow, who noticed that the title page indicated that it had originally belonged to Washington and Lee, at that time known as Washington University. He returned the book to the university's labor and library 52,858 days after Gates had removed it. Librarian Laura Turner graciously waived the fine. If you think you can ignore library fines, think again. Rabbi Abraham Sibru of Queens, New York, found that out the hard way when he was denied a mortgage loan to an overdue library fine. The Queens Public Library had turned the matter over to a collection agency, which reported Sibrow's fine of $295.40 plus $66 in late fees to credit agencies. The embarrassed rabbi returned the late materials and cleared his record. Perhaps we should all take a page from the book of 91-year-old Louise Brown of Stranraer, Great Britain. As of July 2009, she had borrowed and returned nearly 25,000 books from her local library, and she's never had to pay a single fee. The unlikely art career of Grandma Moses. Late bloomers take heart. You haven't missed your chance. That's one of the most significant lessons to be learned from the incredible life of Anna Mary Robertson Moses, 1860 to 1961, better known as Grandma Moses. She was born before Abraham Lincoln took office, and when she died, President Kennedy offered tribute. Both her work and her life helped our nation renew its pioneer heritage and recall its roots in the countryside and on the frontier. All Americans mourn her loss. Grandma Moses was one of the most successful and famous artists in her home country and possibly the best known American artist in Europe. Featured on radio, on television, and in magazines, Moses was the first artist to become a media superstar, and the influence of her unique folk art style continues to this day. Indeed, it would not be outlandish to say that Grandma Moses was and remains the most famous female artist of all time. Unexpected success. It all started in 1938 when a New York City art collector drove through Moses' hometown of Hoosick Falls, New York, and spied her paintings in a drugstore. He bought them all, and then he found her at home, where he snatched up all of her remaining work. The following year, she was represented in an exhibition of contemporary unknown painters at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the year after that, what a farm wife painted opened at New York's Gallery Saint Etienne. The exhibition stopped people in their tracks, and not just because the artist first began to paint seriously when she was 76 years old due to arthritis, which made her give up her beloved embroidery. It was her subject matter, the nostalgic remembrance of things past, and what appeared to be a much simpler time. Ordinary farm activities such as maple sugaring and making candle soap and apple butter. But it was also the charming optimism, luminous colors, and realism that emanated from the canvases, which then cost $3 to $5. These paintings were later reproduced on everything from ceramic plates to greeting cards. Not all as easy as it seemed. But Grandma Moses' life was no rose garden. She was indeed a farm wife with all that the role entailed, a hired girl. Before that, at age 12, she left school and home, where she had 4 sisters and 5 brothers, to go to work. At 27, she married the hired hand on the farm, where she did the house work, and they had 10 children, 5 of whom died as infants. Grandma Moses eventually outlived her husband and all of her children, but she did enjoy her 9 grandchildren and more than 30 great-grandchildren. Grandma Moses painted more than 1,000 pictures, including 25 after her 100th birthday. The paintings have increased dramatically in value. Today, her smallest works begin at $15,000, whereas a large oil painting can command in excess of $100,000. In 2001, the Gallery Saint Etienne created a traveling exhibition titled Grandma Moses in the 21st Century. It earned rare reviews from the public and critics, including the New York Observer's notoriously tough Hilton Kramer, who gushed, "Grandma Moses is back and she's enchanting." Grandma Moses was a tough old gal, but her basic philosophy, is getting tired, was one that remains relevant. I look back on my life like a good day's work. It was done and I feel satisfied with it. I was happy and contented. I knew nothing better and made the best of what life offered. Best out of what life offered, and life is what we make it. Always has been, always will be. The death of Sherlock Holmes. I am in the middle of the last Holmes story St. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote to his mother in April 1893, after which the gentleman vanishes, never to reappear. I am weary of his name, but Doyle was wrong. it would take several more months for the author to figure out a suitable demise for his world famous and wildly popular detective. But why kill Holmes at all? It's a mystery. After bursting onto the scene in 1887, Sherlock Holmes became one of the most enduring literary characters of all time. His popularity gave Doyle the financial and artistic freedom to pursue whatever creative avenues he chose. But as the years went by, Doyle began to feel strangled by his own creation. There are many theories about Doyle's decision to kill off Holmes. Some postulate that publishing deadlines were tight and the pressure of always having to come up with intricate plots was wearing on Doyle and affecting his overall literary output. The difficulty of the Holmes work Doyle wrote was that every story really needed as clear-cut and original a plot as a longish book would do. One cannot, without efforts, spin plots at such a rate. Another theory is that because he was so busy writing Holmes' stories, he did not notice the beginnings of an illness in his wife that eventually became tuberculosis. As a doctor, Doyle should have recognized her condition long before it developed advanced symptoms, wrote biographer Martin Booth. It has been suggested that Doyle felt guilty for this and blamed Holmes. Perhaps killing the character was a form of revenge. Whatever the reason, Doyle had been thinking about killing Holmes for quite some time. Toward the end of 1891, he mentioned his plans to his mother, and she frantically pleaded with him to change his mind. Doyle did so, albeit briefly. Fearful Falls. Doyle knew that Holmes needed a proper death. A man like that mustn't die of a pinprick or influenza, she said. His end must be violent and intensely dramatic. In the summer of 1893, Doyle told his English cleric and novelist, Silas K. Hawking, of his plan to kill Holmes. Why not bring him out to Switzerland and drop him down a crevasse? Hawking said it would save funeral expenses. Doyle laughed, but the conversation stuck with him. During a trip to Switzerland, he visited the famous Reichenbach Falls, and he decided the foaming waters there would be suitable and would be a suitable end for his detective. Doyle then set about writing The Final Problem, in which he created the criminal mastermind Professor Moriarty. At the end of the story, the two adversaries locked in combat apparently plunge into Reichenbach Falls. Killing Holmes. Doyle noted in his diary, or so he thought. Killed Holmes. It's dark here, but I don't want to adjust the light. A cry heard around the world. The death of Sherlock Holmes unleashed worldwide protest. The Strand magazines, publisher of the Holmes stories. The Strand magazines. All right. Stories lost 20,000 subscriptions, and people in London wore black mourning armbands. Even the British royal family was upset. For years, Doyle resisted the pressure to bring back Holmes. Finally, in 1901, he released The Hound of the Baskervilles. I want to say Bakerville, but it's Baskervilles. But said it before Holmes's death. However, the public still wasn't satisfied. In 1903, Doyle relented and published The Adventure of the Empty House, which brought Holmes back safe and sound. It turns out he never went into the falls at all. Ultimately, Doyle's creation had a life of its own, and he went on to write Holmes stories for another 2 decades.